Alrighty, Brick Squad, we're back, continuing our discussions on hormones. In this video here, we're going to discuss anti-diuretic hormone. Not anti-diarrhea hormone, anti-diuretic hormone. So that's ADH. To understand anti-diuretic hormone, we need to first understand what a diuretic is. So diuretic, I'm sure you may have heard of this term, but it increases urine production and urination. So a diuretic can lead to dehydration, obviously. So on the other hand, an anti-diuretic decreases urine production and decreases urine. So anti-diuretic hormone does come from the pituitary gland, which is the inferior part of the brain. So obviously it's more kind of more super or more deeper than you can really see here, but it's inferior to the brain, so kind of almost in this region, but obviously in the middle of the brain there. So there's two parts of the pituitary gland. There's the anterior pituitary gland and posterior pituitary gland. So anterior pituitary gland takes up about 75 to 80% of the surface area, 75 to 80% of the space of the pituitary gland. Posterior pituitary gland takes up the other 20 to 25% of the space. So the infundibulum, just get some terms out of the way. Infundibulum is the stalk of tissue that connects the hypothalamus, which is above the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland itself. So infundibulum connects hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, or hypothalamus to the hypophysis, which is hypophysis is just another name for the pituitary gland. So the anterior pituitary gland is also maybe referred to as the adenohypophysis, where the posterior pituitary gland may be referred to as the neurohypophysis. So it means the same exact thing, and the posterior pituitary gland is controlled by the nervous system here. So now that we got the kind of basic terms out of the way, we're going to dive really into the ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone. So the anti-diuretic hormone is produced by the hypothalamus, and then it's secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. So hypothalamus produces ADH, goes down to the posterior pituitary gland, where it's secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. And the secretions of ADH from the posterior pituitary gland are due to nerve impulses from the hypothalamus. And the stimulus of ADH secretion is low blood pressure. So low blood pressure, it causes the hypothalamus to produce ADH, and then the ADH goes to the posterior pituitary gland, where the ADH is secreted, and the target target cells of ADH are the kidneys, blood vessels, and the thirst center, aka the hypothalamus. So kidneys, blood vessels, and thirst center. And obviously this is a negative feedback system here, negative feedback loop mechanism. So the effect of ADH is going to be an increase in blood pressure. So decrease in blood pressure is the stimulus of the ADH secretion. I may have said blood glucose before, but the stimulus of ADH secretion is low blood pressure. Low blood pressure is the stimulus for ADH secretion, and then the effect of ADH secretion will be an increase in blood pressure. So the effect on the kidneys, let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So ADH secretion affects the kidneys. So first off, anything that goes into the kidney tubules, the little tubes in the kidneys, and stays in the kidney tubules, goes out as urine, goes out as piss. But ADH stimulates the kidneys to increase water absorption. So that means kidneys are say holding water here, so increase water absorption from the kidneys. So water's going to be pulled from the kidneys. Guess where it goes from the kidneys? The water goes into the blood vessels, which increases the volume of the blood vessels. Increase the volume of the blood vessels increases the volume of the blood pressure as well. So it's the pooling. Once again, ADH stimulates kidneys to increase water reabsorption. So the pooling of the water from the kidney tubules into the blood vessels. So this will actually decrease urine production, which will increase blood volume and ultimately blood pressure there. So that's how ADH affects the kidneys. ADH also affects the blood vessels as well, and it causes vasoconstriction. So vasoconstriction is the narrowing diameter of the blood vessels. So you narrow the diameter of the blood vessels, obviously the blood pressure is going to increase. If you think this is the blood, say this is the blood vessels, this is blood traveling through. So there's not a lot of pressure in there. If I constrict this blood vessel, if I narrow this blood vessel, there's going to be more pressure on this pen or on this blood pushing through. So vasoconstriction is the effect of ADH on the blood vessels, which increases blood pressure. Also, ADH secretion affects the thirst center. Thirst center is also called the hypothalamus. So what ADH does to the thirst center, it increases the sense of thirst, kind of like I am right now. I'm getting pretty damn thirsty. But actually, that's why we got water. That's why we got water. So ADH secretion increases the sense of thirst, which leads to increased fluid uptake. Increased fluid uptake leads to increased fluid volume in the blood vessels. Increased fluid volume in the blood vessels leads to increased blood pressure. So once again, ADH secretion affects the kidneys, increases water absorption, reabsorption, increases the blood pressure. Affects the blood vessels, ADH secretion does, causes vasoconstriction, which increases the blood pressure. ADH secretion targets the thirst center, increases thirst, increases fluid uptake, increases fluid volume in the blood vessels, increases blood pressure once again. So low blood pressure is the stimulus for ADH secretion, but other than that, a increase in osmolarity also affects ADH secretion. So just a reminder, osmolarity, we discussed it in I believe it must have been, I think when we were discussing osmosis before in the passive transport mechanisms in a previous video. But reminder, osmolarity is the measurement of solutes in a solution. In this case, it's the measurement of solutes in the blood. So an increased osmolarity in the blood causes it increased ADH secretion. So either increased osmolarity in the blood or a decrease in blood pressure will cause ADH to be secreted. So it's a kind of a fluid system here. So whether the osmolarity increase in the blood and or the blood pressure decreases, it will cause it can cause ADH to be secreted to balance this either osmolarity out and make there be a lower osmolarity, or balance the blood pressure out and allow there to be the effect would be greater blood pressure and increased blood pressure. So this is a negative feedback system, ADH secretion is. So if it's due to the increased osmolarity, it's going to decrease osmolarity. If the ADH is secreted due to low blood pressure, the blood pressure is going to be increased after ADH secretion. So think of it like a mixed drink, essentially. If you're making a mixed drink and you make it too strong, this would be referring to the increased osmolarity. So if you make a mixed drink, make it too strong, you can't pull the booze out of the drink. What you have to do is add more mixer, in this case it would be, but add more fluid into the blood volume or into the blood vessels to decrease that osmolarity. So since you can't pull that solute, the increased amount of solute from the blood out of the blood, what you need to do is increase the fluid volume in the blood, which will in turn decrease the osmolarity there. So the stimulus of ADH secretion is low blood pressure or increased osmolarity. Due to low blood pressure, ADH affects the kidneys, increases water reabsorption, which increases blood pressure. ADH affects the blood vessels. It causes vasoconstriction, which increases blood pressure. Also affects the thirst center. ADH secretion does. Increases thirst, increases fluid volume, increases blood pressure at the end of the day, and then an increase in osmolarity also causes ADH secretion. So ADH secretion caused by increased osmolarity, and the ADH will cause the osmolarity to ultimately decrease. So that's ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone produced in the hypothalamus, secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. Bada bang, bada boom. Stimulus is low blood pressure, increased osmolarity, and the effect is either an increase in blood pressure or a decrease in osmolarity.